This is the Leadership in Insurance podcast, brought to you by FinPro Search Partners.
Insurance companies are businesses and they need to look for the long term and be sustainable.
We went from 0 to 1 and now it's going from 1 to 100.
Insurance as a concept, as a kind of service, is brilliant. The execution is what we're looking at now. I think the companies that are going to succeed are the ones that are going to understand and master the art of intent. When we talk about innovation, we lean too heavily to think about technology and we don't think about creating a culture of innovation.
I think innovation is essentially continuous improvement of existing processes and platforms and product.
Right? It's got to be easy. It's got to be seamless.
Good morning and welcome to the Leadership in Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bonds, and I'm very lucky today to be joined by Justin, CEO of Shepherd. Justin, how are you?
I'm great. How you doing, Alex?
Yeah, I'm good. It's always the podcast ruse. We've been chatting for 10 minutes and then we hit record. The most unnatural thing in the world, trying to be the most natural thing in the world. But Justin, a pleasure to have you on. This is one that we've wanted to do for a while, and we've had to reschedule a couple of times, haven't we? So mainly on my side as well. So apologies for that. So I'm glad that we got to do it. But I always want to start like this. So Justin, it'd be really good if you could introduce yourself and of course the Shepherd business.
Yeah, of course. And glad to be on and chatting a little bit more about what we do and Insurtech in general. But I am the CEO of Shepherd, which is a MGU that focuses on the commercial construction space. We launched the business about 3.5 years ago. We are entirely casualty focused in terms of our products today, but as I'm sure we'll talk about, we're moving into property with our first offering, Builder's Risk, fairly soon as well. So a growing team, we are a tech-enabled business. So there's a bunch of ways that we use technology to do things differently in what has been a very traditional segment of the insurance market. For me personally, I've spent my whole career in the construction space, was a civil engineer coming out of college and took the path into construction as a result of kind of picking between that and design and some of the other things you can do as a civil engineer. And one way or another, I sort of got involved on the business side of construction and a little bit into the finance group at one of the larger general contractors that I was working with. And as is, I think, the case with construction finance, it very quickly lends itself into risk management and opportunity to run the risk management team at a fairly large GC in the New York City market. Which was a fascinating and eye-opening experience for me. It was a chance to kind of peek behind the curtain and really see all these different things around how the business thought about risk, how it thought about insurance, how it thought about retaining risk, and obviously profiting off of that. And ultimately, that was a Kickstarter for me to move into to startup and ended up founding a SaaS business really based on my own experience as a risk manager and a lot of the things that I thought were super inefficient about my day-to-day. And that company was called TradeTap. We ended up building that for a couple of years and sold it, ended up at Autodesk. And then Shepherd is the second go for me and something that we've been working on for the last about 3 years.
Amazing. I thought that was interesting about your career is, that journey is kind of like construction related tech, now the risk side and the insurance side of tech. What do you think that I think it's got some obvious advantages, but what are there specific advantages you think that having gone through that journey to get to where you are today?
I think being naive is an advantage. Our industry, and when I say our industry, I think the commercial insurance industry is really plagued, in my opinion, by status quo mindsets, and a lot of people that I think really struggle with, this is how it's been done and it's worked pretty well, or maybe it hasn't even worked, but it's always been the way that we've done it. And so as a result, let's continue to do it exactly the same way, even as industries and technologies and things advance. And so all of that's not to say that like everything about the way that people underwrite in commercial insurance is wrong. In fact, so much of it is right, and we try to really like lean on the things that are lessons learned from the past. But I think being naive and asking why, quite often being able to say, hey, like, why do we have to do it this way? Or can we think about doing something a little bit differently, is actually an advantage for me, and ultimately something that I think we've built on quite a bit here at Shepherd.
Yeah, being naive, I think, is hugely important. I think that's really funny. I've had quite a lot of entrepreneurial ventures. This is probably the most consistent thing I've done, but I've had a shop, and when I was younger, I used to work in bars and restaurants, and I got very close to buying a bar. And I just really laughed because I literally walked into this small bar that I knew was doing badly because I knew the leadership, but I had an idea of how I could make money out of this bar, mainly because I was going to work on it with my friend and we were going to not have any other staff. But I just walked in and said, I want to buy your bar. And like I had no money, I had no like backing, but it was like, let's see if I can get a price and then I could figure it out. And it's just a pure naivety of how complex it would be. I never would have entertained it, but it got really close, and I always think that's kind of such a good example of like I think that's what you need in business sometimes, just to go in and go, well, why do we do things the way that we do them, and also being a bit fearless, and fearless and naivety, I think, come quite closely together. Um, but let's talk about InsurTech. This is back-to-back podcast where I've sort of questioned the usefulness of that, and obviously you didn't position it that way, but you would be put into the InsurTech bracket. How do you justify the tech part of InsurTech in your business? That's what I want to know. Where does tech come into play in this underwriting space that you're now operating?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like the application of technology on an insurance business is really critical for what we do. And I think as a result, like we feel it's fair to call ourselves InsurTech. There's really kind of like three core areas that we apply technology that I think generally build towards unique IP that Shepherd has that ultimately will make us different at the larger scale. The first is how we underwrite. So the way that we intake information and intake data, and to an extent, the way that we launch products, which is kind of an evolving, idea of platform that we're building out here. We want people to be able to come to Shepherd with a vision for how they want to execute a commercial insurance product, and then all the infrastructure, all the technology, all the way that we execute and bring that product to life is what exists here and what is truly a platform business. And so, we really start with how do we underwrite and how do we do it in a differentiated and much more efficient way than exists in the rest of the market. The second big application for technology for us is the way that we think about data. And so, most insurance carriers, they, only use exactly the ingredients that they need to run their pricing and their sort of, quantitative side of their risk selection or their insurance pricing. So they're extracting information from a submission. They're all in most cases doing it super, super manually. And then they're running their models against that, and everything else gets thrown out and put in the waste bin. At Shepherd, we've kind of taken an opposite approach, which is, yes, we have data that is necessary for us to run our kind of models as we see them today, but we actually want to extract as much as possible, if not everything, from a submission so that we can study, are there things that we're missing out on? Are there things that we're not paying attention to, leading indicators of performance, good or bad, that we aren't really considering today? And I think thinking about data structure and thinking about the way that we extract information from raw submissions is something that is really, really important. And I think probably important for every single InsurTech business that exists today. But again, in our industry, like nobody does that. Nobody pays attention to what am I missing out on. The other big thing in the data bucket for us is integrating with novel data sets that other insurance providers don't use. And so a big thesis of Shepherd is that the construction industry has evolved. The evolution of construction is that it's much more digital today than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. And as a result, all these different tools that are being used are creating data and data byproducts that we want to be paying attention to. And so Shepherd underwrites the data from these technology products as part of our process, and that's something that is quite unique in the industry as well. And so it's kind of the second category. And then the third and final category where I would kind of bucket us as InsurTech is the way that we think about risk services. So, a traditional insurance provider is going to provide, all sorts of resources that ultimately are all kind of like feeding towards making their clients better out in the field or making, trying to prevent things that otherwise would turn into loss. A lot of times in commercial construction, risk services looks like an individual, a risk engineer, going out to a job site and walking that job site and creating a report and then, submitting that report back to the client and saying, hey, here's all the things that I noticed. Here's what needs to be corrected. And here's, your likelihood for having a claim based on what I saw. That's like a snapshot in time, and that's something that ultimately makes the client better, maybe once a year or maybe, once every quarter, in a good scenario. We want to build software that provides that same level of service, but does it in a much more real-time, day-to-day active operations basis. And so we have a dedicated team here that thinks about risk services in terms of how do we deliver software alongside insurance products that makes our clients better. And I think that's, again, that's a very kind of Insurtech thing, because, ultimately it gets to how do we build something that's, tech enabled, but also very scalable to a large audience as well.
Yeah, I think that's that perfect combination, and I think and that's why it comes an overused term because you've got a lot of businesses out there that are just sort of digital first, i.e., they're using modern infrastructure and modern platforms, but aren't really building and investing in the tech, which you obviously are. I found your marketplace such a like an obvious idea, like such a brilliant idea as well. But I mean, I think the best ideas are. I was just you might want to explain this to people. I know you touched on it just there, but like, where did this come from in the kind of life cycle of the business? Was it part of the kind of founding thesis, or is it something that's evolved in as you've developed as a business?
Yeah, when I was so my role at Autodesk, and Autodesk is one of the largest providers of construction technology, in the world. And at this point, they've gone through some, really heavy acquisition cycles, and they've put together a number of different products that are really, really popular and broadly used across the United States and across the world. Um, and so I had an interesting role there while I was there for about a year and a half. I was running the risk strategy team within the broader construction group. And so anything that was like risk management or fintech focused was, ultimately something that we were trying to work on within my group. And I think the vantage point that afforded me was really, really interesting. We felt like we were talking to our clients about how the technology we were delivering was making them, better risk, how we were helping them reduce claims, improve loss outcomes even when they happen. And so, the clients really resonated with that message and they agreed with us. And anecdotally, we had all these different sort of scenarios or data points around how a client was better as a result of the tools and software that they were using. But as we started to bring that information and those anecdotes to our insurance carrier partners, whether it was, large scale carriers, and then obviously, the brokers that sat in the middle of those transactions, there was just kind of like a sort of gap between what ultimately we felt like we were doing, and where the underwriting would really dig in. And what I mean by that is, there was a willingness to engage at like a marketing level. There was a lot of interest on the insurance side to say, hey, like, I think that what you guys are doing is great and I want to support it, maybe even like, throw a nominal discount on my insurance programs. But nobody was saying, hey, feed me the data, like let me understand the data and actually underwrite the information in a sophisticated and even sort of tailored way. And so all that is like a long way to say that for me, the core thesis of Shepherd was born out of that being a missed opportunity. And so the idea of building a marketplace, and the idea of, really wanting to be the first insurance provider that was able to underwrite the technology stack of a business as part of the way we evaluated their casualty and or property risk, I think was just kind of fundamental to who we are. I would say even on sort of the reflective side, our very first products in the market, excess liability, we only sort of scratched the surface of realizing kind of the true value of that thesis. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. We were an excess only market. It wasn't always easy for us to make the impact we wanted on the whole program. As we've evolved and we've become a primary insurer, meaning we're the first dollar that a client is engaged with, and we're sort of the front lines of their insurance program, the ability to make impact on the way we think about terms and conditions, pricing, the way we think about the value of that technology data has just exploded for us. And so I would say, like, in year three, we're only beginning to really lean in on that core thesis and that idea of marketplace in the way that we wanted to, but we had to sort of evolve to that point where we felt like we could. So it's an exciting moment for us, and obviously something that is very, very core to what we do.
Mm. Yeah, I thought it was great. I was interested to see Procore on there as well because I know that they were building or have built an insurance proposition as well. But yeah, we'll get them on to talk about that, so you don't need to. But the I wanted to ask you about team building the right team. You know, you and I have had some really good conversations about finding the right people. But you're very thoughtful around this. And I wanted to kind of ask you, how do you codify for finding the right people when hiring? Like, what questions do you ask? And I'm particularly kind of looking at, and I'm really always interested in this point about like trying to take people from traditional insurance carriers to come work in something that is so tech focused, is so different. Um, yeah, how do you find those people? And are there any specific questions that you ask?
Yeah, it's challenging, right? Because I think, finding signal in an industry where it's super traditional in a lot of ways is,
Mm,
there's a lot of really great, talented people who would be a great fit for Shepherd, but they actually don't even know it yet. And you've got
mm,
to kind of walk and search for who has the right sort of skill sets or mentality to be a fit for here. Um, I look for micro entrepreneurs to really think about it in kind of that sense of the word. Looking for insurance operators, whether they're underwriters, whether they're managers and leaders, that have I'd say a perspective or an opinion on the way that the world should look in their sort of whatever corner of the world that they operate in. And so one of the questions I like to ask to, an underwriter or an underwriter leader is, if you could rebuild the underwriting process that you operate in every single day, like what would that look like? What would be the things that you would change and why? And sometimes you get, answers that are really, really, I'd say high signal in terms of here's somebody that's going to be immediately the right kind of culture fit for our team and gonna be really excited about working with an engineering group that is innovating on how we underwrite or thinking about how to make underwriting more efficient. And you also find people that are going to bring fresh ideas to the table for us that we may not already be thinking about here internally. So I like to sort of dig in on like how do they want to envision the world and what matters to them. What do they want out of the role? Are they excited about growth? Are they excited about the opportunity to do something different? Or are they just really happy in kind of like the sort of status quo, and Shepherd is just kind of a shiny new object. In those cases,
mm.
um, I think it doesn't make as much sense for us, and then we end up being a little bit more selective.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question because it allows room for people to have, because sometimes what we're looking for is like, oh, there has to be a signal that they've either tried to go and work for an Insurtech or they're much more engaged in it, rather than um, you're giving them the framework to go, right, you might not have looked at these other roles. You might be working more traditional carrier, but if you had the time to do this yourself, if you could think about this in a different way, how would you? And it doesn't have to be tech driven, does it? It's more just kind of having that mindset of change and adaptability and evolution of an existing model, which is why I like that question so much.
Even just frustration. Hey, I wish that this would be
Mm,
better. I
yeah,
think is
yeah.
obviously like I want to understand why. Why is that frustrating? What have you tried to do to change that? And if the answer is like I've made an attempt but it hasn't worked out because I'm sort of pushing against like a very, very difficult environment to change, like that's I think also signal for us that a place like this might be the right place for that person to really like realize their true potential.
Mm, mm. I do a little bit of that with my team actually, because we don't really operate like a. I mean, you always think that, but I really don't think we operate like another search or recruitment business, mainly from a cultural perspective, actually, and probably one of the constraints on our growth is that I'm so selective about that. But a lot of that is what we ask is if someone comes and goes, "Oh, these are the things I do," but there's no kind of interest in doing it a different way, then that's problematic because then we're only going to serve up the same, and if you're serving up the same, then it becomes about price, and no one wants to be the cheapest people on the block because that's nowhere to win any business. We talked a lot about tech and versus kind of not versus insurance, but I wanted to kind of ask you that question. You know, you've built things like an AI, this AI compliance tool, which I think seems essential for customers in your target market. How much do you think about evolving the tech side of what you do versus evolving the insurance product? And like, how closely linked are they? Does one lead the other, or are they kind of like treated as kind of independent things and evolution on both is good? Or yeah, how do you think about that?
Honestly, this was an area I think we struggled in our early days. I mean, and I say struggled in the sense of, before we even raised, subsequent rounds of capital and you're resource constrained, and there's a lot of great things about being resource constrained. It forces you to prioritize and make decisions. But one of the things that always was like a difficult trade-off was the question of, are we focusing on the services side of Shepherd and the things that we can do around software to make our clients better, or are we focusing on our core platform and the things that make our underwriters better and make our team more efficient and ultimately allow us to do a lot of the innovative things around data or program creation. And so I think those two things, it was a zero-sum game, and they had to sort of in different cases push and pull against each other. The part of the reason we raised capital was for the ability for us to expand our engineering team and have dedicated resources that focus on both. And that's the biggest change in terms of how we think about things today. We have a dedicated services team where their entire surface, or I should say, their entire attention is customer surface areas. And when we think about customer, it's not just about the end client, it is about the broker. The broker is a customer or partner. They're somebody that we think about as much as we think about the end policy holder. And so customer facing surface areas is something that our services engineering group thinks about every day. And then on the flip side, we have a platform team where their customer is our underwriting team. And so they, literally look over the shoulder of our underwriters and ask questions around how do they make their lives better and easier. One of the biggest problems that we're trying to solve on platform today is how do we make sure that our underwriters are multi-product? How do we make sure that one underwriter at Shepherd can write not just excess liability, but primary casualty, so general liability, workers' comp, commercial auto, and something like builder's risk, which is a property cover. We want to have that type of dynamic underwriting team, and really think the answer to that is through technology. So we've got to have a team that focuses explicitly on what we call platform. And then in order to make sure that we're doing, innovative things for our customers, the compliance tool being a great example, we've got to have a dedicated services team, which is what we have now.
I think that I find it really interesting, the evolution of the kind of underwriting role, because we are seeing this move away from monoline underwriting, which was kind of heralded as like the premier way to do it, specialize in a line of business, become the kind of absolute expert in that. And I don't think anyone's saying we don't want people to become experts, but technology allows you to kind of supplement knowledge and kind of be across multiple lines. I always think about it from an enjoyment perspective. I always think about it from the people perspective, because I work in the talent industry. People want to be challenged, and some of that is kind of learning new classes of business. And look, they may all be related, like excess casualty and builder's risk, and they're all in a space. But just the fact you're able to do that, how much does your underwriting team embrace that kind of that willingness? Have you seen have people commented on that being something that they enjoy about working for Shepherd?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a filter, to go back to some of the things that we would ask in an interview setting. If somebody wasn't excited about being, multi-product and being dynamic in that way, I think it's an indicator for us that like they're probably not going to be a great fit for us at this moment. But I think about the multi-line nature of underwriting more from the lens of what are the problems that we need to solve in order to allow somebody to do this effectively at scale. And I think for the most part, you mentioned, expertise or specialization, and what it comes down to is that underwriters are limited by the fact that there is so much information, there are so many rules around each line of business that they're somewhat kind of hamstrung by having to interpret and obviously execute on those rules and do so without kind of, and obviously to move quickly and still serve the customer in a way that is necessary. We really like this idea. And so we think about that as a problem. We think about that as like a problem where a solution is technology focused. We really love the idea of having, our underwriting guidelines and advisories and things that inform all those different rules, actuarial rules, regulatory rules. We want technology to be the steward of really kind of interpreting those on a risk by risk level, so that our underwriting team can focus all of their attention on the client. And they can think about selection, and they can think about a holistic view of the client. What are all the coverages that this client needs, and how do we make sure that we're providing as much as possible, and really sort of, from our view, growing our market share with the best customers. And so, one of the things that we get really excited about, and we've been able to study, is that generally speaking, insurance carriers have the best loss ratios with clients where they have multi-line relationships with them.
Right. Yeah.
So we want to position our underwriting team to be thinking about multi-line relationships all the time. And the only way to do that is to give them the ability to go execute on a single account with multiple products. But again, like the challenges and the reasons why they wouldn't be able to do that, to me, those are all problems to be solved, and we think technology can solve them.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that the clients that we have the most successful relationships with are where we do we do multiple parts of their hiring, because we know the customer, we know them really, really well. So we have a and I suspect that's kind of in almost any industry, but it's interesting how impactful that is on the insurance industry. We've like almost out of nowhere, almost hit the end of our time. So what I want to talk about is the roadmap. What's the roadmap forward? What's on the agenda coming up? Is there product development happening? And knowing you, there is, yes, on tech and on insurance products. So I want to make sure that we get time to fit that in. So what's next for you?
Yeah, a couple of things pop into mind. We're growing the team quite a bit. We raised our Series A in the fall of last year, and we're really putting that capital and investing that capital into talent in a lot of ways. And so we've been growing our engineering team. We've also been growing our insurance team. And so not only is it folks that are underwriting and folks that can support the existing products that we have in market today, but we're also targeting those micro entrepreneurs on the insurance side. And it's amazing talking to people who they have a perspective, a vision for something that they have expertise in. And I really feel like Shepherd more and more is becoming kind of that platform for them to realize that and to activate it at scale. So we're not just thinking about construction, we're thinking about other commercial industries that are adjacent to construction, and how do we start to think about expansion and diversifying the things that we operate in. So that's one area is team. The next insurance product that we've been very vocal about is builder's risk. And so that's a product that we're looking to launch here in 2024 that would complement our core casualty offerings really, really well, and obviously something that we'd be extremely excited about. And then finally, just on the tech side, we have a couple of really exciting kind of product motions happening right now. Really sort of starting to think about the customer-facing surface areas, and how do we continue to build out more and more resources for our customers, both broker and for our end policyholder. And so we had a big launch earlier this year. Basically a relaunch of our existing relationships with some of those construction tech providers. Procore is one of them. Another company called OpenSpace is another. We launched a program called Shepherd Savings, which is a program that really puts big dollars behind the value of these tools when we think about underwriting and when we obviously develop our premium. We want to not just take in data and underwrite it and then provide a discount. That's nice. We also want to provide feedback loops to our customers where we say, hey, these are the things that you're doing today. Here's what the best of our industry is doing, and here's what your premium and your program could look like going forward if you're able to accomplish these goals. And so feedback loops is really kind of an area that we're focusing from a customer-facing perspective, and something I'm really excited about here in Q3.
Amazing. Justin, I love the business, that, and we know some of your investors as well, and it's going great guns. But I just love how you genuinely are marrying the insurance and the tech, and we want to see more businesses like that, because I think from a kind of risk management perspective, it's just the way the business needs to be. So really looking forward to kind of hearing more about the success of Shepherd. But I wanted to say thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, it was fun.